Welcome to TrulyFit.
John, thank you so much for joining the TrulyFit Podcast. Why don't you give my listeners and audience a little background as to who you are, your credentials, and what you do day to day in the health space?
Thank you, Steve. It's my pleasure to be here. I've been at what I would consider or on a journey of health and wellness for most of my life. Most of my adult life, I've had some interest either in sports, exercise training, nutrition, all the above. But for the last, at least half of my life, I've been much more focused on the health side. I started out where I was early in my career interested in, as I mentioned, sports and exercise training, but I kind of shifted once I got into, I should say, when I left the drug-free competitive bodybuilding world, I really shifted to more of a health focus. I still bodybuild every day. I still lift that type of way every day, but I really I decided pretty early on in my life that I couldn't make a career or a living in bodybuilding without doing drugs and going completely down that road, and I just chose not to do that. So I spent the greater part of the last 25 years of my life in academics. Although I left academics full-time 6 years ago, I had made some discoveries in using polysaccharides, certain key nutrients that hopefully we'll talk about in a moment, that spurred me to end up leaving academics. But I did spend, as I said, about 2 decades there at the University of Miami at the medical school. I'm a physiologist by training, and I made some very key discoveries I hope to share with you in a moment. And I decided, after just so many years of trying to get funding from the government or different foundations or even individuals, I just couldn't see myself doing that anymore. And I certainly couldn't see myself doing that for the rest of my career or my life even. I have colleagues who end up staying there till they're in their late 70s or even 80s. You can't tear those guys away, but I chose not to do that. I decided I had learned enough, and I had reached a peak. Not that I couldn't have continued maybe peaking, but I think I had reached a peak in my academic career, in my research career, where I felt like I had enough opportunity and enough information to spread a broader message to people in the world, that I felt like if I stayed in academics, I probably would not necessarily be hindered by it. Just wouldn't be I wouldn't be able to make that my priority. And so in business, now selling dietary supplements based on that research, not all of it, but some of it, the most important parts of it, I feel like I have the opportunity to meet with folks like yourself and to go around the world at conferences or even locally at community events and just be able to share this message of what I've learned. And so that's what I do every day. I'm somewhere involved between education and customer service just about every day at this point. I still have a research angle, if you will. I still publish a little bit. Academic publishing is not my first priority anymore, or one of my first 2 or 3 priorities, but it's certainly still important to me. So I still do some of that, but yeah, I'm somewhere between education and customer service pretty much every day today, or content creation. I guess that's the third one.
Sure. Yeah, you have to wear a lot of hats as an entrepreneur who's in the supplement space, and including doing your research and proving the naysayers wrong, because there's always a lot of those in the industry. But before we go into the supplement specifically, I really want to ask you, was there like an aha moment in your research, or was this like cumulative? Was over time you kept seeing the same thing repeated over and over that led you to build the supplement? And you can talk about also sort of like what it helps to do as far as brain health is concerned.
That's a great question, Steve. I think for me it was kind of a combination of the two, actually. So it was a long evolution, like as I mentioned, going through stages in my career where I kept sort of building on things that I had learned, and so I just evolved out of a long interest of having health and wellness, and then exercise and nutrition as part of that. But the aha moment was when a couple of people about 20 years ago came into my life, two people, one here in South Florida, the other one in the Dallas area. Didn't know these people, they didn't know each other, but they came into my life and they educated me about what they were doing with their own experiences with polysaccharides. And Steve, it just completely, not only changed my career, it completely changed my life. And it took me down a road of studying these polysaccharides and making some key discoveries that really have propelled me to where I am today. So that was my aha moment. And the lady, Barbara Kimley, here in South Florida, was a cancer patient at the University of Miami. She was taking this hydrolyzed rice bran that completely saved her life after being given a terminal prognosis from having metastatic thyroid disease started taking this product after doing radiation, chemo, several surgeries, was still given only a 6-month progress and ended up living about a 9-month period after that, and unfortunately did eventually succumb. But just, a total, talk about getting on a pulpit. This lady just loved to talk about rice bran. And then the gentleman, Dr. Reg McDaniel in the Dallas area, Dr. Reg had been doing all of this work in aloe at the time that I met him, and was sharing with me all of his experiences about this amazing polysaccharide from the aloe vera plant. And again, it completely changed my perspective on what polysaccharides are and the benefits that they could provide to us. And so I'm very grateful and actually dedicated to those two people who completely changed my life.
Can you sort of redefine through your own terms what you mean when you say polysaccharide? Because the average person, let's say personal trainer, nutritional specialist, just maybe even the general population who knows about this stuff says, what is Dr. John talking about? A starch, like glycogen? Like what does he mean? Like why are these things special? What's novel about the polysaccharides that you are referring to?
Absolutely, and that's really one of the things that I love to do, Steve, not only just for the fact that these polysaccharides can help people, but anytime you mention the word polysaccharide, for most people, I know you're not one of those, and I'm not lumping you in that bucket, but a lot of people have no clue what a polysaccharide is. So as we know, through mass media over the last, 10, 20, 30, maybe even years, sugar has been vilified, right? If you hear the word sugar, you immediately think bad. But polysaccharides are sugars. And so I always tell people, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because you hear the word sugar, that is not an indictment. In other words, if a product has high fructose corn syrup in it, sure, I'm right there with you. Avoid that stuff. Don't eat it. Don't consume it whatsoever. But when you talk about these complex polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran that me and my colleagues have studied, man, those are two completely different animals. And so a sugar is not a sugar. And so a sugar depends on not only the source, where it comes from, but also its molecular structure, which is just as, if not even more important. And so these polysaccharides, when you look at all the sugars that occur in nature, be it monosaccharides, disaccharides, or poly or oligosaccharides, that last group, those more complex ones, man, they are loaded with so much information to guide and direct our genes, to tell our cells what to do. And when we introduce those into the diet, I don't know anyone who eats aloe vera, but when you concentrate those polysaccharides down into a powder after you've taken out the water and some of the other stuff that the aloe vera produces naturally, and you concentrate just those polysaccharides and then introduce those into the diet, man, you get some really amazing effects. And that's what I've seen now for going on 20 years. So it really comes down to it's what the psychologists refer to as a teachable moment, when you can talk about polysaccharides and put them in their true context, and not just once again throw them out with all other sugars and say, oh, well, no, sugar is bad for you. So these polysaccharides are very, very I would say one of the top, if not the top, arguably the top tool that you can put in your toolbox to help you keep your health and maintain it over the rest of your life.
So is this specialized sort of reduced form of aloe vera coupled with the rice bran, and you can describe if that rice bran would be different than your standard rice bran, do they have like a synergistic effect? Is that why you put them together?
Absolutely. That's a great question as well. So when we were looking at designing, some of our clinical trials at the University of Miami, we were trying to not go down that typical road of pharma, right? Like we have this research design gold standard, if you will, that's called the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. That works beautifully for pharmacology. Any pharmacology study that looks at that design and tests one molecule for one mechanism of action for one disease or symptom of a disease, that design works perfectly. For nutritional science, forget it. It does not work. And I know that we as a scientific community, we continue debating about what the standard should be for nutrition. I would argue that it's almost impossible to meet that criteria or to meet that threshold of saying that, this is the kind of research that nutrition should be conducting. So with all of that said, we were trying to design, in the case of people with Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis, we were trying to design a formulation that would meet the goal of providing the cells the raw materials that they need to function properly. forget looking for magic bullets, forget looking for that. Everybody wants to reduce it down to that one key. We have this very reductionistic attitude in general, and we're always looking for that, that one thing. John, tell me that one thing that I can do. There's no such thing. You have to do lots of things. And so again, we had this just great idea that I don't hope I'm patting myself too much on the back, but we had this great idea to combine these polysaccharides, put that formulation together, and we just ended up with really dynamic results.
Now, I know you say one of the benefits of your supplement is brain health, but I feel like that's a very vague term. So what do you mean by brain health? Is this just cognitive function? Does this mean I could answer SAT questions faster? Like, how do we really analyze brain health?
That's a great question too. So my colleagues and I have been using this sort of generic umbrella term, brain health, for a while now. Not that we did. I'm not taking credit that we created it, but to your point, lumping brain health, or lumping all the people that have a brain, let's call it a brain health concern today in society. So whether you're talking about children with either autism or ADHD or ADD, something along those lines in early life, all the way to the end of life neurodegeneration that of course has major significant effects on cognition, and then all of us in between. You may have a veteran or an athlete, somebody that's had TBI or concussion syndrome, and then of course don't forget mood disorder. We've got an epidemic of people with depression, anxiety, bipolarism, all those things. So when you look at that entire spectrum of our society today, literally everyone has the potential to be affected by something within brain health. But very specific to your question, I'm glad you brought this up. The way we defined brain health in our research was exactly to your point, looking at cognitive function. And I know a lot of times people will associate cognitive function just with memory, but it's way more than that. So you have things like executive function, recall speed, your ability to process information, your ability to have spatial orientation. These are all the things that go into cognition, not just your short-term memory and not just your long-term memory. So I want people to understand that cognition is much more than just, oh, well, I forgot so-and-so's name, or, oh, I forgot that appointment. It's way more than memory.
Is self-reporting part of your studies? What do you think about that? How do you use that? And you can sort of just describe it from a researcher standpoint, like how one sort of self-describes benefits from a supplement.
That's a great question. So in the research, actually, when we do cognitive assessments, we actually have a neuropsychologist or a neurosocial worker. Neurologists or psychiatrists, they're too expensive. I mean, you don't waste that physician's time doing cognitive assessments, but we always have like an as objective as it can be. I mean, it's still a human assessing another human, so there is clearly a bit of a subjective component to that, but nonetheless what we're talking about is having a professional who's trained in the ability to assess cognition, to assess another person with some kind of a tool or an instrument. Now, in terms of on the commercial side, if you will, that's obviously very subjective. I mean, I would love to be able to have in my company a very objective way of assessing, that type of change or improvement in people's functioning in terms of, not just cognition, but really overall quality of life, including, say, for example, sleep. I mean, obviously we know sleep and insomnia, that's a huge issue in America today. And then, of course, stress management, that's another big one. Those are the kinds of things that I would love to have, sort of as a way that we could work that into our ongoing customer contact. Unfortunately, we're just not that sophisticated enough yet. But in terms of going from the subjective to the objective, the truly objective measures, what we can do is look at things in the blood, the urine, and the saliva. Usually it's in the blood, where we look at different markers, whether it's something in immune function, inflammation, oxidation, stem cell production. These are things that we have for many, many years, for decades now, looked at in our work in terms of showing how these polysaccharides are so beneficial, primarily related to immune function, and then of course inflammation and oxidation. But all these different markers are obviously very objective. You can't fake your blood, right? I mean, you give a sample and that's it, unless you're exchanging samples, which obviously would be illegal, if not at least unethical. So yeah, there are different ways that we can assess changes in people's functioning, both subjectively and objectively.
Do you recommend that the general public take some biomarkers prior to taking a supplement like yours, or just, I guess in general, I always recommend they do that, right? You want to have a baseline. I want to know what my particular levels were in from everything from a CBC to a hormone panel at 25, so that when I'm 35 and 45, I can see a change because they are unique to me. It's not just about the number, right? So do you recommend that most people have these biomarkers yearly, bi-yearly?
Steve, that's a great question as well. I definitely do, as much as I can. Sometimes I get people that come to me and maybe they're very strapped financially. They don't really have the means to do that type of testing. And sometimes, some of those panels, some of those immune function inflammatory markers like different cytokines and growth factors, I'm no expert in insurance, but those I don't think have been classically covered by insurance premiums. So, you have to work that balance. I get plenty of people that have more money than they know what to do with. So certainly for those people that they have no problem in doing that kind of objective assessment. But I totally agree with you. Data are data. And when you have data and you can track those changes over time, that's very powerful. And I do try to do that as much as I can with customers and clients. It's just, a lot of times people are not really willing to go to that level. They want to feel better, right? Their goal is they're either struggling with something themselves, or they have a spouse or a parent or a child or someone else in the family they're dealing with. And, it depends. And I try to work with every customer. I really do. One of the things I pride myself on is trying to have as much of a personal relationship with as many people who want to do that as I can. Obviously my time is limited too, but I agree with you. Data are everything, and as much as we can collect data and be able to evaluate changes, that to me that's where the proof is, right? The proof is truly in the data.
The supplement world is a bit of the wild, wild west, and it's tough because there's so many great supplements out there, and there's so many bad supplements out there. Things that are just being peddled behind some LLC, and they don't have the proper ingredients, and they're being made in China, and we don't know really what's in them, right? You have to get them third-party tested. So it's sort of a tricky industry. How do you handle, let's say someone wants to use your supplements and they have some sort of rheum issue, rheumatoid arthritis, and their rheumatologist is sort of unsure about this. It seems like obviously the science, the mechanistic data behind this, that you can prove otherwise, but do you pass that information along to your client to pass that on to the rheumatologist? How does that work?
This is a great question as well. I totally agree with you. As the old saying goes, it only takes one bad apple to spoil the bunch. I remember my dad or my grandfather told me when I was a little kid that saying. I never forgot it. And so you're so right, Steve. I hate to label people. In my research career, I worked with some really good companies, in my opinion. Standard Process, Biotics, Premier Research Labs, Life Extension. There are companies, in addition to now, me, my company, there are those of us who are doing it the right way. People that are putting money behind their products, saying, here, take our product. We want it to be independently evaluated by you. And, and I'm saying now I'm putting, going back a few years when I was wearing my research hat. So those are the people who, it's like I tell anyone else. I'm sorry if I'm being a little long-winded answering this question, but I tell people a lot when they ask me, well, how do I know what product I need to take or what nutrient I need to take? To me, it's like any other decision. You have to do your homework, right? You have to look at as much as you can to try to find the companies that are doing it the right way. And I hope all of my customers and the people who know me think that John, Dr. Lewis Nutrition, we're doing it the right way as well. So that's one point, just doing your homework, making sure that you know who the company is that you're buying from. But number two, I agree with you. It's so important to have all the information available to people. So all of the studies we've published, we just had a new article published, it's been accepted by the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease from our Alzheimer's study. That just got accepted 10 days ago, so that'll be published hopefully in the near future. But absolutely, anybody who wants to see our research, and they can go to PubMed. It doesn't just necessarily have to come from me, but I am more than happy to share with the customer, with his physician, anybody who's working in association with that person to say, well, wait a minute, I want to see the information here. What is it that, this person is, my patient is coming to me with this product and I want to know more information about it. So yes, I absolutely share all that information. I'm happy to share, certificates of analysis. I mean, obviously my formula is a proprietary blend. That's my own intellectual property. I don't go to that extreme. But in terms of certificates of analysis, showing suppliers, I mean, all that stuff. My manufacturing partner is in Dallas. He's Sean Hack. I mean, he's a wonderful person that I've worked with for many years now. I think, all of those things, to be as transparent as you possibly can to the audience, to the greater world, is very important. And I think anybody that tries to, finagle that or cover it up, that's probably the people or the companies that you want to avoid. But I feel like, for the most part, other than anything that I consider my own IP, I'm an open book. I mean, again, you can go to PubMed, search my name, you can find all the articles that we've published that support what we're doing today. And I don't want to be somebody that someone else points the finger at and says, oh, that guy's, he's trying to sell snake oil, or he's a bad person, don't buy his stuff. So.
Yeah, and I actually do think from a marketing standpoint, Dr. John, that it really helps that you kind of put your name and your face and your likeness interconnected with this. Not to say that there's not some charlatans that also do that, but really there's no way to run from it, right? So let's go ahead and say this research was bad, or it was done improperly, right? You're tied to that for the rest of eternity. So you have all the incentive to make sure that you're doing everything on the up and up, and that this actually works because your name and likeness is tied to it.
That's right, absolutely. I mean, again, it's, Dr. Lewis Nutrition, as you said, I've put my name on this. It's not like, I'm faking it. It's not like I went to PubMed and, did some lit searches and then said, oh, well, this showed this and that showed that. Let me throw this together and sell it. I think it'll make me $1 million or make me a millionaire or something. No, I mean, everything that we've done is published. It's freely available in terms of accessing it through the public, through the domain of the National Library of Medicine. And one other thing, I think, in fact, I just said this, I gave a little presentation at the Pembroke Pines Chamber of Commerce meeting yesterday. I have been taking my own formulation for over 10 years. I've had my mother on it actually a little bit longer than that. I've had my 3.5-year-old daughter on it since she was 6 months old. My wife's been taking it for the last couple of years. I mean, we all take this stuff, and I would be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I was out here selling a product that I didn't also take or that I didn't believe in. I mean, what bigger hypocrisy would you be? And same is true for just overall my approach to health and wellness. Anything that I lecture about or any opportunity that I have to talk about, my supplements or the research or my philosophy in nutrition or my philosophy in exercise training, I do all those things myself. And if I look like, if we were sitting here today and I look like I weighed 400 pounds and I was about to die of a stroke, nobody would take me seriously. They'd think I was just a fraud or a hypocrite. And so I do everything that I do, everything that I talk about publicly is exactly what I do in my own life every single day.
Can you talk a little bit about immunomodulation and how that pertains to polysaccharides in your supplement?
Absolutely. Immunomodulation, in fact, if I could do, we say if we could do it over, right? Like one of the things that I really became much more interested in in life, in my career, was the immune system. It's just so fascinating to me how the immune system works and how it's so much more than just our first line of defense against infection or invasion. It's actually, if you use the analogy of the conductor with the orchestra, it's actually the conductor. It's constantly in contact with all the other major organ systems, trying to keep everything else in balance. And so immunomodulation, it's almost like, constantly, again, going back and forth, whether it's with the central nervous system, the cardiorespiratory system, the skeletal muscular system, the endocrine system. It's constantly going back and forth, taking its cues from what signals it's getting, mostly through our hormones and through our peptides, and getting those signals and then saying, okay, I need to either increase this factor or decrease that factor. But immunomodulation is just simply, it's overall, to answer your question, it's part of the concept of homeostasis, keeping us in balance along with temperature, blood pH, acidity, alkalinity, all those other things, but keeping us regulated from the immune system perspective so that it's surveillance, so that it's ready to go, so it's ready to fight again, in the case of infection, but much more so importantly than that is, as all of our cells go through this constant life and cell death process, we want our immune system to say, that cell is dying, let's eat it, let's get rid of it, let's knock it out, let's prevent it from turning into something carcinogenic or atherogenic or something that will ultimately harm us. And so immunomodulation just simply means keeping our immune system surveillant, active, and capable of defending us and keeping us healthy. That's really what immunomodulation is all about, and we've shown this time and time again with our polysaccharides, how effective they are for helping the immune system achieve that.
You mentioned before how there's not one quick fix, there's not some special key that opens up all the doors here. I always say, the phrase I use, the analogy, there's not one right way to throw a football. You can look at all these different quarterbacks, they do it differently, but there are wrong ways. There are very bad ways to throw the football, right? So in your research over time, right, because you're so interconnected with looking at biomarkers, looking at overall health and wellness, looking at longevity, what diet have you looked at, or what sort of diet plans that actually have major problems? We don't need to say what is the best way to go about things, but what are some of the worst ways to approach overall health and wellness from a diet perspective that you've seen that bore out in the numbers?
Well, this will probably, not make some of your listeners happy, but I would say that one of the biggest problems that I have is the overconsumption of red and processed meat. I know that, the carnivore movement has really gotten popular in the last few years, but man, I got to tell you, those folks are ignoring a lot of information around what happens when we consume red and processed meat. It was 2015 when the WHO came out and said red and processed meat. I think it's red is a likely carcinogen and processed meat is a carcinogen, and they were particularly referring to GI or colorectal cancer. But when you look at all these different compounds that are created, they're all doing bad things. Now, if you're eating raw meat, maybe you're avoiding some of that stuff because you're not cooking the meat and turning mostly the fatty acids that are being converted into these heterocyclic amines and polycyclic heteroamines. They're just very, very carcinogenic. In addition to that, these things also end up creating gene adducts, which are very, very bad for us. So basically what they're doing is they're cutting into your DNA, and then they're causing your genes to malfunction. And then ultimately, DNA malfunction, gene malfunction, that's one of the hallmarks of starting the process of cancer creation. So that is pretty irrefutable. And I just, I scratch my head a lot thinking, I don't care what you eat. That's up to each person and his or her right to choose what they want to eat. That's fine. But to just foolishly ignore this branch of science, to me, just doesn't make any sense. I'm all about it when it comes to saying, well, a lot of people are maybe not eating enough protein because they're eating way too many processed carbohydrates. Okay, that's fine. That's a fair argument. And, this whole thing about insulin resistance and even Alzheimer's now being called type 3 diabetes. There are lots of different things, going down this trail of glycemia. But I think there has to be a balance. And I just think that, the carnivore crowd, they're taking it too far. And oh, by the way, in addition to not recognizing all that branch of science, they also seem to be saying that fiber is irrelevant. Well, again, that's a very weird argument. We need non-digestible fiber to help pull out all the stuff that our body is processing as it metabolizes the foods that we eat. That indigestible fiber helps to pull all that out and helps us to poop better. And again, that's a pretty well-established branch of science that shows that fiber is necessary for us to help prevent colon cancer. So those are two things to me in this new craze of carnivore that just don't resonate with a long branch of science that's been shown and repeatedly shown and continues to be shown. So those would be two areas where I would caution people. And then a third one, not necessarily as much diet related, but some combination of behavior and supplement related, is related to vitamin D. We have about 70% of Americans who are either insufficient or deficient in their vitamin D level. Well, vitamin D is so important. It's not really even a vitamin. It's actually a pro-hormone, but it has been shown to interact with over 3,000 genes at this point out of our roughly 40,000 genes that we have. And I'm sure as as people continue looking at vitamin D, that number will only go up and increase. And so, not getting out in the sun, for those of us in South Florida, we have no excuse. Of course, if you live in the northern latitudes, you obviously have less sun exposure. But even if you can't get out in the sun much, my goodness, take a vitamin D supplement. It's cheap. It's one of the cheapest products on the market. And man, it will make a huge difference in your life, not just for your bone health, but literally for everything, whether it's your brain, your heart, your liver, your skin, your kidneys, your lungs. Everything is affected by your vitamin D status. So that would be a third area that I would throw in there that people are just tragically missing out on.
Yeah, just to go back to your point on the carnivore diet, the tribalism seems to be at an all-time high in the nutrition world, right? And I think part of it is that people are all pushing against each other, and it's not even about the science; it's about my group, right? I'm only vegan. I only eat meat. I only never have dairy, never have this, never have that. I don't know how much of it's actually science-based, but I will say. What I also see, which is a problem, and you could comment on this, is that you can feel a particular way if you're just trying to be introspective about your body by eating something in the moment, but that doesn't necessarily represent what that's doing for your body long term. So you'll see people like, oh hey, I had some flax oil and I pooped my brains out, so I'm never going to have flax oil again. It's like, well, maybe your body wasn't ready for that amount of flax oil. Maybe you've never put an oil like that into your system. You haven't been eating that sort of food. And I think that also goes with the carnivore movement. You'll hear some of these people say, every time I eat like salads and vegetables, I feel full. I just don't feel right. And when I eat meat, I feel good. It's like, okay, well, these short-term effects and feels doesn't necessarily mean that it's better for your body in the long term. We also have to look at biomarkers.
That's right. Well, and to your point, I think I haven't seen any studies yet on clinical trials on, outcomes related to just going purely carnivore. I think, but within the keto movement, you mentioned keto. I think obviously, that helps people lose weight in the short term, and it does some good things for glycemia. But what we don't know is what is the effect of eating a very high fat diet like that over years or decades. That's a very unanswerable question at this point. And so again, to me, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to your point, like this tribalism that we have today in nutrition. It doesn't make a lot of sense to be pushing so many so-called definitive answers when really the answers are not even known from a long-term perspective. If you need to go into ketosis to kickstart a weight loss program, hey, do it. But how many people are going to actually sustain eating 60 or 70% of their diet in fat? I know I couldn't do that. That's just way too much fat for me. I don't know how many people could do that.
Yeah, and it's not in a vacuum too. So, adherence to a diet is why it works. Right? You're supposed to stick to something, and a lot of different diets work if you stick to the plan, at least short term. Just for weight loss, let's talk about. Forget about health. Let's just say weight loss. You can figure out different diets that work. But the problem is you have to look at your life and your day-to-day, too. Right? If you have a family, if you have kids, right? I cook for my family. Is my 3-year-old going to eat the same thing that I'm going to eat? I don't know. Likely not half of the time. She's going to throw it across the room. So what exactly am I eating? What is my family eating? And can you adhere to this particular diet? And I think people are short-sighted in that, right? They try a diet, it works for a little bit. Okay, can you do this for the rest of your life? Are you going to say no pizza ever again? I think that's going to be fairly difficult to do.
That's right. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Actually, I gave a lecture last year at a conference where I was asked to present on the safety of different weight loss diets. And, at that time, I read several articles about intermittent fasting, which is another recent craze that people seem to be going through. And actually, Steve, I think there were 3 clinical trials that I reviewed. There were no differences ultimately in weight loss, which was the primary outcome, between whether you were going intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating or a standard, just sort of basic macronutrient diet like what American College of Sports Medicine has recommended for, eternity, or going high-fat or going high-protein. Not one thing made a difference at the end of the day over whether it was a 90-day period, a 6-month period, or a 12-month period. You had like, these tiny little variations in the amount of weight loss, and that was it. So all these people that want to hang their hat or die on the hill of this certain specific way that you've got to lose weight and no other thing will do it, man, they're not following what the science is saying. They're actually really exposing themselves as just being a tribalist.
Yeah, sort of piggyback off that leads into my next question. I recently was reading and then also watching about centenarians all over the world in different populations, people living healthily like into their hundreds. And there seems to be a bunch of correlatives that almost look like they're causal because they're everywhere. And it's that they're eating whole foods of some sort, and some are different. In certain populations, they're eating more, let's say, sweet potatoes because they grow naturally, and others are eating more fish because that's easier for them to get. But they're all eating whole foods. They all have some sort of purpose. They're not just sitting around, whether it's a religious purpose or a community purpose, whatever that may be. They all have outdoor activities that they do on a regular basis, and I guess it's interconnected with that. None of them are sedentary. They're all moving around, right? And this seems to be the obvious statement, right? Is that this is all we need? Would you agree with that? I know it's also good for us to look into all the specifics and the mechanistic things, but isn't it really just good to take a global picture and say this is health is not really that difficult? We're just not doing the things we're supposed to be doing.
Once again, Steve, I totally agree with you. In fact, again, just mentioning that speech I gave yesterday to the Chamber of Commerce, Mother Nature has, at least from a nutritional perspective, I mean, obviously movement and stress management and sleep, things that we can more control as opposed to what Mother Nature provides us. But what Mother Nature provides us, in our environment, I mean, we have the answers when it comes to eating things that can help to protect us. And yeah, I agree with you. I mean, for the most part, we have the ability to make choices to say, I'm going to exercise today rather than being sedentary. I'm not going to smoke. I'm not going to drink alcohol, or I'm going to drink very little of it. All these different things that we can do ultimately are, I think, to your point, the reason why these blue zones have shown that these people live a very long, and not only a long life, but actually a functional and happy life. They, again, as you mentioned, they have a purpose. They do things every day. So I agree that a lot of this is already known. I think what's fascinating, and that was one of the reasons why I did switch more of my interest from exercise and physical activity to nutrition, was because I felt like many of the things in the exercise science world, with all due respect to those folks, are kind of known. Like we just know that, in terms of movement, it's almost like duh, we need to move every day. But, if it comes to like somebody who's in professional sports or some kind of competition, there might be some, 1, 2 to 5% of increase where efficiency becomes like the real key to the answer to some question. I mean, I think those are the kinds of things that are maybe interesting in in exercise and exercise physiology. But on the other hand, like when it comes to nutrition, to me, that's where the world is still kind of, I guess, a bit in the dark in terms of what some of these nutrients, maybe even certain plants that haven't even been looked at from a therapeutic value perspective yet. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of those, unlike aloe vera or turmeric, some of the plants that we know that are already so beneficial. I think, to me, that was what got me more interested in nutrition, was some of those unknowns and some of those things, as we mentioned polysaccharides a few moments ago, where that's an area where people commonly don't know much about. So I think those are areas that are ripe for continued continued research in nutrition. But in general, I think it's not really that difficult to understand why people are sick today versus in the blue zones where people are not so sick. It's just look at the difference in behavior, as you said.
You don't have to divulge company secrets here, Dr. John, but what is the process of getting an aloe vera plant, which I assume you could not just eat if you found one growing, to getting it bottled up? Is it an extract of some sort? Is it a specialized process? How does that work?
That's correct. So a lot of times when I talk about aloe vera, people say, well, I can just, I'll grow it and then I'll cut a leaf off and eat some gel or something. And so, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in fact, if anything, take that gel and apply it topically to a sunburn or a cut or a wound or something. But yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, the polysaccharides are a very small component, or by percentage weight or volume of that gel. So the gel is about 98.5 99% water. And so you have to strip all that water out. And then, of course, you have other things in there too. You have amino acids, fatty acids, other vitamins and minerals. So you try to get as much as you can of those out too. You have the aloin, that latex-like material that obviously you don't want to consume. Otherwise, you'll get diarrhea from that. But really the key for like what we do in our formulations is taking the ace-mannan, the acetylated polymannose, the mannose. It's got several different synonyms. It all means the same thing. But getting that polysaccharide concentrated into an amount that has a therapeutic value, and that's where just again, consuming the aloe vera leaf gel is not going to do it. You have to have it concentrated, and it's not like, I'm not talking like hundreds of grams. I'm actually talking about a few hundred milligrams, which is really nothing in comparison to, several hundred grams that people eat in their diet every day. So it's actually, by comparison to how much energy you consume, it's a very, very small amount.
Dr. John, this has been great information. Can you point my listeners to where they can find your supplement and maybe more about what you do and what you talk about?
I'd be happy to, Steve. Thank you. It's the best information site for our listeners would be to go to drlewisnutrition.com. That's Dr with no period, Lewis, Lewis, nutrition.com. Our flagship product is Daily Brain Care. That's based on, again, all this research that we conducted at the University of Miami. And we have our address, phone number, email address. They're all listed in the website. If anyone would like to contact me, I'm always happy to, again, have a personal relationship with people. But we have a lot of information on there. We don't have the articles published on the site. We don't want to violate any copyright issues with the journals, but I'm happy to send those out. But I do have summaries of all of the articles. I've got videos. I've got blog posts. There's testimonial videos, product reviews. I mean, it's a lot of information there. So that's the best place to find me and the best place to learn more about my work and our products.
I will put links to the site in the podcast description. My guest today has been Dr. John Lewis. Thank you for joining the TrulyFit Podcast.
Thank you, Steve. It's been great. I really appreciate it.